this episode, we're going to be talking about the fairing, this ladder, and the tire mount. For the exterior bodywork, a lot of the stuff that we put on here, like the fairing on the top, the ladder that's behind us, the swing arm on the back for my tire, were all made except the hitch. I had just purchased a Kurt 5,000 pound hitch, and Kurt makes a bunch of different hitches for different vehicles, and they make it so you can mount it directly to your vehicle, like a factory mount. And that's all pretty straightforward. So they send you with your hitch, they send you with instructions on how to mount it. According to the instructions, it just kind of all goes together like that. And it starts out by taking these T30 bolts out. There was 4 up top here, and it looks like 1, 2, 3, 4 down here. Make sure you disconnect your rear sensors. That's something you gotta do when you're putting it on. Now it's time to pull these 16 mil bolts to get this frame off, or this bracket off the frame. And they even send you with these nifty little bolt wire things. These little fish lines, because sometimes you gotta feed it through some piece of framework and get these bolts with spacers in. And it makes it a lot easier when your hole is, so this spacer with this bolt needs to be fed through this opening and then pop out that little guy there. Done. Once I got those fished through, just to lightly adhere the actual hitch to the bumper frame so that they'll hold themselves together, while you then put these back, put the whole thing back up into place and adhere it with these bad boys. Boop. If you're doing it on your own, it's super helpful to have a jack or some type of jack stand, because they are kind of heavy, and if you don't have someone there helping you put it in place, you need something to get it in there to get your bolts to mount it. As you can see, the hitch is now on, and it was mostly painless. Really, it only takes about an hour to get that on there. Eventually, I did wire up some hitch, like trailer lights for it, but I did that way down the line. I should have did that right off the bat. You're supposed to wire it through your vehicle, but I had to pull everything off and then run it through the bottom because the interior of my vehicle had already been sealed up and stuff like that. So, tip, do that when you're putting your hitch on. So onto the tire mount. All right, it's about, everything's falling. What did I leave up there? I'm on my way to my buddy Nick's house. The plan today is to weld together a swing arm tire mount for the back of the van. The tire mount was something that I looked up online and knew I needed, because what we ended up doing was taking my propane tank and putting it right where the spare tire was originally mounted to. And I know a handful of people are gonna comment, well, you mounted your propane tank under your van, you're gonna blow up. I'm still here 2 years later, surprise. We needed a place to put that spare tire, because when you're going on these trips and say you're going out to these climbing spots or these camping spots, there's plenty of things where you can run into where you might have a flat tire. So you need a backup. And having those tires, they're way bigger than you think, and they take up a lot of space if you want to store it within your van. So having it mounted outside makes it that much easier to get to, plus you get all that extra storage space. So I went online and I looked at these things, and they're like $500 and up, which is really expensive. And I ended up purchasing just a mounting kit, and I got it off eBay for like 150 bucks. I might be rounding down on that. But it was a lot cheaper than buying the full-blown pre-built tire mount. And so when I got there, we started to take our measurements. We decided that we could probably make the whole thing out of 2x2 tubing.
Yeah, which you used the thin wall tubing, which was a mistake.
Which I think we used a thin wall because
His MIG welder couldn't get hot enough to
penetrate.
Right. So that was a whole thing, but we'll talk about that in a second. We went to the steel yard once we decided, okay, these are the materials we're gonna need. I think they sell them 12 by 2x2s. You can cut it down because we came in a car, so you gotta make sure you can get whatever you buy back to your house.
That's 7 feet.
And then you can also buy cutoff pieces for a lot cheaper because they will have like a scrap bin. And so we went and looked through the scrap bin, and we bought some stuff from there as support brackets. Just bumped up to 54.
So it totaled out to be about 50 bucks, $49.76. Then we got some 2x2x11 gauge square tube, which is this. And then we also got some miscellaneous cuts to use as reinforcement pieces.
We wanted to mount this square tubing to this Kurt hitch, and then off the end of that would be this pivot point, which is just a little arm, a metal arm threaded that comes with the kit.
So the bumper's off, and the idea now is to get the paint off where we're gonna weld to it.
So we did like a 2-foot run at 2 45-degree angle cuts, and that welded on fine. I think we had to hit a couple spots because when you're welding, you need to have a flush. Everything has to touch.
The best they can.
The best it can, so
Especially
you
with
get
a MIG fine wire feed.
so you get a good bond, right?
Good transparent metal and the metal you're trying to weld to it.
So this little bar here is what the tire arm actually pivots on. And what we have to do now is they give you all this excess to then cut to size.
Once we had that, we had to figure out how we wanted to mount this threaded metal rod.
Right, your pivot point.
The pivot
where
point.
the bearings are mounted. That's where
The
your
bearings sit.
are.
So to adhere that pin there onto here, the idea is to drill a hole and then weld these two things together. This is gonna go on the bottom of that, which is just a dissected bolt. It would look like that. And then take the whole piece, slide it into the hole there that we're gonna put in here, and weld it all together. So there you have it, one solid piece there.
So now we're gonna have to do is clean all of this up so that it's flat, so that this can actually drop all the way down into it.
And that's how we did it. And it looked good to us.
Yeah, it looked really good.
Once it was on there, I mean, I think the overall frame,
Oh yeah,
the tire
it
frame,
looked super.
the tire frame itself, like the part that the tire mounts to, is just a big triangle. Actually, Steve,
Get over it.
do you have a tape measure on you?
Front center, Steve.
We need to measure the tire's arm real quick.
Did I tell you this one? Let's see, I've got so many of them. Nothing comes to me right now.
25.5 long by 23.5 tall. And then we did some angled 23 at the longest end, 4 at the longest end. And then we also put support pieces on each corner. Bing, bong, bing, cap, side. So yeah, and then we capped everything. And we also had to cut in a curve to fit the bearing sleeve. Rock! Quit giving him that. He's gonna get diarrhea. So we mounted all that, we welded all that stuff, or he welded all that stuff together, and he had all the tools to do it. He used the MIG welder.
Got a brace there, We're gonna put a brace there.
Here comes another big tractor.
Yep.
Where was I? So once we had all of our welds made, then we put our bearings on. And the bearings, they're a tight fit, so you need to figure out a way that you can get them down and in without actually damaging the bearings. What we didn't do was put a bottom seal, and we also didn't pack our bearings with grease, which is something you need to do when you do automotive bearings, correct? Open, non-sealed bearings. We didn't do that.
This is how the bearings sit.
And I also painted it because, of course, it started raining like right when we finished. The sleeve was on, we put it all down, and we got the top bearing in, and we tightened it down and put a cotter pin in to seal it all in place and put the cap on. The last thing we wanted to try to do during that day was put a latch on it because we needed a way to keep it to the van. And that was one of the reasons why we only had the arm extend out 2 feet so it could sit somewhat flush to the bumper. What ended up happening was that latch that comes with the kit, the piece that we put to the van, didn't sit on the same plane. It was too far back, so we couldn't lock it. So for the first couple weeks, like the first trip we took, I just strapped it.
So we hit one little snag at the very end there with this latching system thing. Maybe not being on the right plane as the actual mount, and so it won't latch down. So we've got this ratchet strap hook up now, which will get me home, but it looks really good. And there's a tire now. I have a spare tire on the back of my van.
So what you ended up putting together was a spacer. You put a
to bring
spacer
it up
back
to where
there.
you could get it to lever over and lock down.
Right. Eventually we landed on one where it was just
A padlock.
with a bolt that holds it in.
Yeah, it was an extension type lock.
Yeah,
and
it
we
was a
just
big
cut
one,
off.
which I wasn't too jazzed on, but now it did.
He's all jazzed.
No, it saved my van from being broken into. But now, recently, just last weekend, we had to redo that weld. And that's because we didn't get a good bond on that first go.
I'm at my dad's and I'm working on my tire swing because the weld has cracked. Usually this is flush with the bumper. You can see it's like an inch down now. I can't really bend it up, but it's permanently bent there. You can barely tell on camera, but it's right there, and underneath there's a split. It's a ton of weight on one pivot point. Eventually, after hitting so many bumps on the road, it gave way.
The thickness of the metal wasn't sufficient for the amount of weight you have on that swing arm.
So you're saying that square tubing wasn't a thick enough diameter. The reason we went with that was because what he had to weld with was probably a cheaper welder because it couldn't get as hot, right?
Where your weld cracked right along here because the metal is so thin. I can keep doing this all the way around and it'll knock it right out.
So what did you do to beef it up? What did you put on there?
I added a thicker metal at a 45. I welded that onto the thinner metal. No, I had penetration all the way through to where they're bonded tight. Then I welded what I'd cut off. I beveled it. That I know.
Right.
I've got full penetration watching the puddle. I know for sure.
It's gonna hold up.
So it's back on, and our bearings.
But that was the thing too, because we didn't pack the bearings, I had to go buy new bearings because they had rusted out and just totally busted apart. And they rusted out because we didn't put a bottom seal on there. So that was another reason why the whole thing had started to lean, and then when it started to lean,
that force that
was coming down on
dragging it down.
So you could get this at any auto parts place.
This is called packing a wheelbarrow. You're squeezing it in. You're squeezing it from one side. What you want to see is it come out the other side. All these things help to seal the bearing from the moisture inside of it, which will destroy the bearing.
So now you're
placing it within the
Outer race.
And we need to force it further in so that we can get the
Grease seals.
which is kind of, it's just a rubber. Actually, there's a little spring in there.
So the grease stays in, dirt stays out.
But this one had a specific shape to go on the bottom, while the other one was flat. Now I have to get it back on and reattach everything that was attached to it, and then should be good. It's back on. We put a bunch of grease on the top there after we tighten that nut down. We're gonna put the cap on, and then it should be good to go. Back on. If you do end up doing this yourself, you will save money, but make sure you pack your bearing, make sure you seal them within your sleeve, make sure that you use a thick enough gauge of metal for the weight you're gonna be putting on it with your tire, and make sure your welds are solid. The bearing pack. And you can watch our mistakes. I could have just said it held up and nothing happened wrong.
Bullshit.
I could have just let it be how it was. And I did spray paint it with like a hammered paint, but it doesn't hold up. Nothing seems to be able to hold up to the weather because at winter here, they salt the roads, the salt immediately hits it and it eats right through it, and then I gotta recoat it. So the one thing method I did seem to get to work was on the fairing. So let's talk about that. The fairing is stainless steel. I knew I wanted something up there because I was noticing a ton of wind noise on the fan up there, that Max Air fan, as well as wind under the solar panels. So we needed something to kind of break that over top. The way we mounted it was straight to that unistrut, which is basically just 2 U's that you put holes in for bolts to go through. And then we use those spring nut unistrut to then tighten it down on. So once we figured out how it was gonna fit, because it took a little bit to get it in the right spot, I took it off and then I spray painted it. And like he said, stainless steel is hard to get a good bond with the paint. And so they do make
an etching primer.
Yeah, so it has a better chance of attaching to bare metal. So I just got that bare metal stuff, I put that as a coat on there, and then I took truck bed liner spray. And that truck bed liner spray stayed on there. I put 2 coats of it, and that has not come off. I've driven in rainstorms, so I should have done that on everything. I should have did that on the tire swing arm, I should have done it on this ladder. Should have done it on everything, which I will eventually, but I haven't yet. On to one of the last things we did, which was the ladder. So again, the ladder was one of those things I knew I wanted because I have solar panels up there.
You had to clean the snow off.
Yeah. And if anything were to happen to the fans or if I have to rewire anything, it'd be nice to get up there. So I went online again and looked for these ladders, and of course, they're crazy expensive. I'm sure people are gonna be like, oh, you can find it for 300 bucks.
You just go to this site, that site, this site.
I talked to my dad, and he was pretty positive he could put together a ladder. And so he did a good job whipping it together. It's roughly 7 foot 2 inches to go from top to bottom. We just mounted it at first with some self-tapping screws to get it in place, and we roughly knew where we wanted it to be, pretty much right over the dent that Nick put in the van, which I still haven't fixed. So when we first attempted to put it on, it wasn't quite long enough, and that's when it became 2 pieces. Now we gotta measure to see how far it sticks out in comparison to the mirrors. But yeah, we needed to figure out how we needed to mount it to the bottom. And like, there's plenty of spots on the frame of the van at the bottom of it. But there's like a little lip that we had to cut through. We had to cut slits
That's
into
to the actual body itself.
where it's sealed to,
Right.
you know.
I'm gonna cut right along here and down to here. That way it'll allow it to go up in farther so I can land the screws on this side of the frame.
So this is what it looks like underneath the van. The idea is to set in 4 screws at the bottom, so you'll see there's 4 holes, and then there's 4 holes up on the top. And so all that load would be transferred to the vehicle. So we've changed our plan on how to mount it. What we're gonna do is now take those unistrut lock nuts, mounting pieces are, and just mount it straight to the unistrut so it's not mounted like we had it
yesterday where it was drilled into these 3 holes.
And when we did that, that's when we went to go put it back on, and Steve was like, this is crooked.
It looks a little
Skewed.
skewed.
Not a 90.
So it's not going on today.
It's not a right angle, it's a wrong angle.
This should be flush with this in order
Like
for it
this
to
down
be
here.
square 90, like that is.
It's sprung
But you can see that it's
all
not.
the welding.
Because when you're welding, everything pulls. Welded to one side, we had it all jigged up. But once you start welding the other side up, the whole thing might beep. Now, before you put your full weld in, put spot welds to keep it from doing that.
Like you tack it in place.
Yeah, that's right. So once you start to lay in a full molten, it doesn't want to go like this.
Yeah.
That's what happens when you're welding a metal.
They went and fixed it, and it fits. I'll still have to paint it and stuff. We still have to do some welds. It covers up that nasty dent that I need to get out.
We added supports. That was the other thing. So when my dad first made it, it was just a rough frame of the ladder. I mean, it was basically there, but you need support brackets to help distribute the weight. You know, your weight's always being pulled down, and it'd help alleviate some of that pressure on that top 90.
Here's the 2 little brackets, the support brackets that my dad put in there. And all of this is angle iron. Every piece. It's like 2 big tracks of it for the body of it, and then each step is a little piece of angle iron. Everything is.
And I coated this one differently. I just used a regular like black primer, black paint to coat it, and it's not holding up.
No, it isn't.
You can see it has rusted. What I need to do is the same thing that I did with the fairing, with coating it with that bare metal stuff to give a really good base, and then nailing it with some truck bed liner.
Ladder's all coated, top half, bottom half, and it's time to mount it. Why'd you go with this angle iron?
Lightweight. Gives you the structural strength you need. More surface area for your feet so you're not standing on a rung. Rungs hurt.
When we did that and we split it in 2 and he fixed it from being a little cattywampus, you added a little spacer. You added that little spacer that's there now. We did have to add 4 bolts to adhere those pieces together with locking nuts and washers.
There it is. Fastened it on the bottom there to the frame of the van. We have a disconnect here, right at the bottom edge there near the plastics. Now that it's got all those contact points, it's real sturdy.
The only other thing I can think of that we did on the exterior was when Greg came over with random decals.
Oh boy, that was
He
a real
had
treat. He had him laying around in his barn.
from an old RV he had.
And he was dead set.
He thought it was gonna look like the coolest thing on the side of the van.
Whoa! It's like a crazy eyeball with an eyelash.
Wrinkled the shit out of it.
Bubbles everywhere.
And so we had to take about 3 hours to get the shit off.
It was pretty dumb.
It was pretty stupid.
That's it. That was all the external stuff. I saved probably a couple $1,000. Yeah, when you buy factory-built items, they're expensive. And, you know, maybe they come together without as many hiccups as we ran into, but we learned and saved a bunch of money, and maybe you guys would want to try something like this.
They always said, having children will be something you'll never forget. And they're right. Because they don't go away.
Now, hold on. Guess what this is? This is the last video that you're gonna have to be in.
Sweet.
We have now, over the course of 2 years, have filmed and built this van and sat down through all the footage and done these interviews. and talked to you guys and showed you what we did. I'm gonna do one more video after this discussing where all the money went.
I'm not in it.
And he's not in it. I didn't think we'd actually do it. I didn't think we'd actually go through, finish the van, and make a whole build series on it and have people watch it.
And that's
So-
total bullshit because I created this monster and I don't stop until I finish what I started.
I'm saying it's something to be proud of.
Absolutely.
And it's something that we can look back on.
Oh, we're
and
gonna
it's
laugh.
Yeah.
When he's changing my diaper and I'm drooling.
Thanks for watching, and share, like, subscribe, hit us up with any questions, and hopefully you can learn something from this.
It's hard to give that square box some shape, and it has a little,
Well, that's very true.
you know, there's just like a hint of Scooby-Doo in there.